William, your videographer from Two Hats Publishing. Welcome to the College of Complexes, being held at Barbeck's Restaurant at 8949 Garland Road, Dallas, Texas. Gently embracing the east side of White Rock Lake. When I entered, I was greeted like coming home to Grandma's house, warm and friendly. When visiting the Barbeck's Restaurant, tell them you want your reservations for the next College of Complex class.
Welcome to the College of Complexes. We started a little late. We wanted to let our speaker get a chance to eat, so that way he can be a better speaker. You know how that is. And there's not a huge crowd here tonight, so we figured we didn't need all the time. Anyway, before I put our speaker on, first of all, we put a speaker on every week, a different subject. This actually started in Chicago in 1951 for the purpose of solving all the world's problems. They're still working at it. We put a speaker on for an hour. We give him an opportunity to tell us what he wants to tell us. If anybody interrupts the speaker, remind the interrupter that we only listen to one fool at a time. And that's one of our rules. And then we have questions and answers, not speeches. And then we have remarks, rebuttals. Everybody in this audience that wants to gets 5 minutes at the podium to respond when the speaker said for or against. And then when the speaker gets a comment and close the meeting. That's how it works. Anyway, before we put our speaker on, we have announcements. So are there any announcements? Anybody have any announcements they want to make? Any announcements? None? No announcements? So where's Susie tonight? She usually has announcements. She had a massage? No announcements for... Do you want to make an announcement? All right, well then don't... Happy Valentine's Day, all right? I'm in trouble. Well, trouble. Anyway, you got any announcements, Don? You want to make? None? All right, just checking. Testing. Don's from Chicago, just so you know. Anyway, our speaker tonight is Jim Davis. He's going to talk about revisiting the letter that changed America, determining what to do. He's a Dallas College Complex regular. He's going to discuss some of the socialist trends showing up in America during the 60s and how a terrified business community implemented what some scholars call the most brilliant strategy in history to take over the political process. He will talk about a distinguished corporate lawyer, 14-page letter sent to U.S. Chamber of Commerce in 1971, outlining ideas of doing it as he described in a manner of that the public wouldn't notice, setting in motion the dynamics that dominated the political process for the past 30-plus years. Jim will present economic data showing how various segments of society have been impacted, how each political party has ignored the root causes of this failing to implement changes to address them, the threat it imposes the security of our nation, and what we can do about it. So that's a tall order. Anyway, without further ado, please give a very, very warm welcome to Jim Davis. I forgot to announce the other things that are coming up, but I'll save that for later.
Okay, let's see if I can get these microphones to work. Everybody hear me okay? All right. Last week I was at a friend's house. We were watching TV and there was a scene with a man laying in a hospital bed and he had tubes in his nose and he'd been fed by a bottle of liquid. And the guy said to his wife, "Honey, just for the record, if I ever get to that stage, just pull the plug." So she goes over and unplugs the TV and pours out his beer. Well, that man would, you have to be pretty sick to be like that. And we've got our economy is kind of suffering from a disease also. And I don't think we've made the proper diagnosis as to what's going on. And without a proper diagnosis, you're going to probably, patient might end up dying. I think our economy has got cancer. I think it's being just eaten away by, well, many factors, but anyway, I gave this speech a year ago, so why revisit it? Because of the impact this 14-page letter had on America. It changed, I believe it changed America more than anything else, yet most people have no knowledge of it. Well, that's one of the root causes right there, a lack of knowledge to why our economy is being eaten away. Neither political party is doing enough to protect and promote the middle class. And I believe doing so will do more to secure America's future than anything else. To do so requires a well-educated, well-paid workforce with enough extra money to run an economy. It's cash flow, bottom line. We've got a middle class. Too many people don't have a dime of discretionary income. I don't think anybody can argue against that. I'm going to show you some. I don't think too many people have an idea of how bad it's really gotten either. We're going to go over that in just a minute. Now, this is going to be a rather controversial statement. I believe in order to protect and promote the middle class, we've got to place the interest of the poor first, last, and always. That's what I think. Because doing that will protect and promote the middle class. Well, there's a few old-timers here, not too many, but probably not too many people remember the 60s and early 70s, but there were some socialist trends going on in this country then. Every once in a while you heard the N-word, nationalization. That's what I'm talking about. Over 40% of the college students had favored socialism. Of course, that's when President Nixon passed the Clean Air Act and created OSHA and the EPA. But a lot of people are aware of that. But you ever heard of the Poor People's March?
Yes.
Have anybody else?
Yes, I heard it.
Well, good, okay. I mean, for 6 months, you had a bunch of poor people living in tents on the National Mall. And that didn't make a whole lot of people happy, just the general public. Every weekend, you'd see somebody on the Sunday morning talk shows bashing the business community. And the business community just sat there taking hit after hit every day, fearing bad publicity if they responded. But they did respond by using one of the most successful strategies ever in history. And that's where this single letter I'm talking about comes into play. In 1971, a corporate lawyer who was a member of 11 corporate boards wrote a 14-page letter to the director of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, and he titled the letter "Attack on the Free Enterprise System," which became known as a PAL memorandum. Now, I know some of you have heard of it. PAL specialized in corporate mergers and takeovers, served on the board of Philip Morris, represented the tobacco industry in several cases, and was a former president of the American Bar Association. He was quite famous in legal circles for structuring sentences when arguing his case, and he applied that skill composing this letter. The Powell memo presented, I quote, how big business could control key elements of U.S. society in a manner the public wouldn't notice. That's a pretty bold statement to me. It worked too. They didn't notice. Powell noted criticism was coming from all respectable elements of society, from the campus, the pulpit, the media, artists, scientists, politicians. Powell, a Democrat, advised the Chamber and corporate America to become heavily involved in molding public opinion, politics, and law, and outlined a blueprint on how to become far more politically active in order to defend free enterprise against socialist, communist, or fascist trends. He advocated constant surveillance of textbook, newsprint, TV content, and a purge of left-wing elements. Of course, that kind of led to big business taking over the major media companies in this country, as I think everybody knows. Powell told conservatives they had to confront liberalism everywhere, and in any way possible, he said they would have to build a new group of organizations and need a scale of financing only available through a joint effort. He said they would have to put aside political differences, ego, and competing differences in order to achieve common goals, including less government, lower taxes, and deregulation by challenging the left agenda everywhere by any means possible. Although he isn't known to have played a part in implementing his proposals, his brilliantly crafted letter, which came along at the right time, galvanized a nervous business community, and the U.S. Chamber of Commerce set about implementing his ideas with a vengeance. Starting with a handful of business leaders, they began to organize a new generation of think tanks, media monitors, legal groups, and networking organizations, all dedicated to the same values of free enterprise, individual freedoms, and limited government. That effort was well underway when the first one was incorporated as the Heritage Foundation. The Manhattan Institute, the Cato Institute, Citizens for a Sound Economy, Accuracy in Academia are some of the better known ones that followed later. I think everybody, if you're in the education business, you know that today's kids aren't being taught the same way they used to be as a result. One goal was to convince the public that corporate interests are in the public interest and that labor, health, safety, and the environment are special interest. Another goal was to influence legislation, government policy, and the legal system. One of the more important things that the Powell memo recommended was business roundtables be set up with CEOs of competing businesses as members, putting aside personal differences with the goal of finding common ground and aggressively launching campaigns to gain political acceptance and promote common interest. The very first one was organized in 1973. Now, prior to that in 1972, and I remember this very well, it became common from 1972 through about maybe 75 or 76. It became common to hear people on TV making comments, making editorials in the newspaper, writing in books about union wages and benefits being equal to those offered by non-union firms. Praising them, but raising the question, we still need them? Well, many dues-paying members took notice, and using "what have you done for me lately" mentality, that began, a lot of unions got decertified. And I'll show you some numbers about that later. These articles didn't mention that union wages and benefits set the standard non-union firms must offer in order to hire and retain a good workforce. Now, I remember seeing many of these articles. Even though I was not a fan of unions, I wondered at that time if something was up. I had no idea. First Business Roundtable was set up in 1973 and consisted of 40 of the top 50, 500 corporate CEOs. I know a person who attended that meeting. The first Business Roundtable was to list priorities and included several think tank advisors who provided information and made recommendations. The man I know was one of these advisors. He told me about this, I think, in the mid-'80s. This is some of the information the advisors supplied. In 1971, union PAC money made up half the total, and only 175 firms had registered lobbyists in Washington, and only 40 Fortune 500 companies had public affairs offices in Washington. By 1979, 80% of them had public affairs offices in D.C. The CEOs were provided statistics about the big business, or the big increase of lobbyists, and assured them more PAC funds had been forthcoming, and were confident more would be forthcoming, and were confident this additional source would overwhelm union lobbying. By 1979, union PAC money was less than 25%, and the total of and over 2,000 firms had lobbyists in D.C. The CEOs were reminded about the union news articles and predicted dues-paying members would succumb to the "what have you done for me lately" mentality, and beginning the trend of decertification. From the time the National Labor Relations Act legalized unions during the Great Depression, making them a powerful force, the business community was committed to getting rid of them. The first Business Roundtable made it their number one priority, and cheap foreign labor was the tool they decided to use, and using PAC money to amend foreign trade policies was the number one strategy. Small policy changes that had already been made in foreign steel and auto import quotas, and since the auto and steel workers' unions were the biggest and highest paid, easing restrictions on auto and steel imports was given priority. Now, most of you can remember when the flood of Jap cars started to hit the market. It coincides with these dates. Anyway, within months, foreign steel and high-quality Japanese cars were taking big shares out of the market, and the race to the bottom for the U.S. economy had begun. Now, by the late 70s, the big industrial cities in the Northeast were struggling to overcome the adverse effects of foreign trade policy changes. I mean, many steel companies, appliance makers, and support industries closed their doors for good, and the cities lost tax revenue as people moved seeking work elsewhere. It didn't take long for the term Rust Belt to be coined, and guess who was blamed for the Rust Belt? Excessive union wages were blamed. Powell's recommendations began paying off handsomely by the 1980s in coordination with President Reagan's hands-off business policy. Now, as Tom mentioned earlier, many scholars credit Mr. Powell for coming up with the most brilliant strategy in history. The juggernaut that he inspired over 40 years ago is still growing and gaining influence today. He delivered that memo to the U.S. Chamber of Commerce on the 23rd of August, 1971. 5 months later, its author, Lewis J. Powell, Jr., was sworn in as a U.S. Supreme Court Justice. He wrote the opinion on the following case, if I can find it. Give me a minute. Where is it? Okay, First National Bank of Boston versus Bellot, but Bellow, I guess. In 1978, the Supreme Court ruled 5-4. Corporations had a First Amendment right to make contributions in order to influence the political process. Justice Powell wrote the opinion that a Massachusetts statute outlawing spending corporate funds to influence public opinion and voting opinions was a violation of free speech. Because of this decision, congressmen from both parties now had access to huge amounts of special interest corporate campaign funds if, and only if, they supported and voted the right way. If politicians stood by their principles and didn't go along, they were pretty easy targets for a challenger. And what do you think they did? What do you think you would do? For members in the Congress and the Senate, they were at the mercy of special interest groups who would contribute campaign funds to the politicians who supported their views. They could either go along or be outspent by an opponent. The survivors went along. By the 90s, numerous business roundtables have been organized with 2,300 members. Politicians, commentators, and prominent, well-respected business leaders begin campaigning for the North American Free Trade Agreement, NAFTA. Now, I think everybody here remembers being bombarded with assurance through editorials, news releases, radio and TV commercials that NAFTA would protect and provide them with more high-paying jobs, stop immigration from Mexico, raise environmental standards, but I think everybody knows it had the exact opposite effect. Most favored nation status for China soon followed, and the public, to a large extent, believes globalization is a natural, unstoppable phenomenon. Now, increased lobbying of Congress, encouraged by the Powell memo, and the First National Bank of Boston versus Bellow Supreme Court decision set in motion the dynamics that would dominate the political process from that time on. And folks, it's not a Republican or Democrat deal. It's a we the people versus special interest deal, is what it amounts to. I remember in the early 70s how shocked I was, and everybody was, when a campaign cost, the first political campaign cost $100,000. Really. I mean, it was shocking. That figures in the millions today, and I think last year we had one that cost $24 million for a Senate campaign. But anyway, the power of big business lobbying quickly overwhelmed those dirty, greedy unions' efforts to lobby against legislation favored by special interest. And I don't think hardly anybody's aware of the lobbying effect the unions had and the positive impact it had on the middle class because from the time World War II ended, there was lots of people wanting to change these trade laws, but they just couldn't muster the support. I mean, they knew right away that they could profit by using cheap labor. Didn't happen though until a few of them happened before that 73 thing, but from 73 to the end of the 70s, the Rust Belt appeared. Now look at Detroit. Anyway, union members were all middle class members, and non-middle class families benefited as well. Now what we've got is a middle class, and I believe a nation in decline. Lobbyist activities led to amending the Glass-Steagall Act. Now, the Glass-Steagall Act was passed in the first week of FDR's term, and it made illegal the banking activities that, in large part, contributed to the Great Depression. Now, those same activities were once again legal, and guess what happened in 2008? Same thing over again. And guess who passed? And guess, by the way, who amended Glass-Steagall? Slick Willie, a Democrat. So don't even try and convince me that any party is doing any good for this country, because they're not. Those are some root causes, but the root cause, the only way to fix it is public demand. Public demand, Congress will respond to public demand. That I know. I believe that the Glass-Steagall Act was one of the very few laws that I like to refer to as laws that worked for the good of all. It protected the little guy's savings from loss. It regulated banking activities to making deposits, or accepting deposits and making loans. That certainly went a long way to get our economy going after World War II and through the 60s, 70s, and some of the 80s. Okay, now we're going to go fast forward to present time here and see how the letter changed America. And I'm going to take foreign trade, lack of news coverage, the need for campaign finance reform, and how they relate to each other to make my example. In May of 2012, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, TPP, held a meeting at the Intercontinental Hotel here in Addison, Texas. This meeting was not reported by the local or national press, except for one small paragraph in USA Today. Now, this is another trade organization that President Obama wants the U.S. to join. Since this is a trade organization that has many developing low-wage nations as members, Why was this meeting not reported by the press? Not only did the media ignore this meeting, they also ignored a protest march by over 500 Occupy Dallas and union members that began in Addison Square and ended up at the hotel where former Dallas mayor and current U.S. Trade Representative Ron Kirk was in attendance. Now, if that doesn't qualify as a newsworthy event, I don't know what the hell does. But it was not reported. This definitely, well, like I said, why was it not reported? Why the news blackout? Well, in the 70s and 80s, foreign trade deficits were reported on a monthly basis. Probably you guys remember that. On Sunday, on Monday mornings, they were cussed out about around the office water cooler also. In the 90s, there were major demonstrations in Seattle, Washington during World Trade Organization meetings. Now, those are probably good reasons why special interest groups would not want coverage because of possible opposition that may influence Congress. Well, you know, prior to joining NAFTA, again, politicians and supporters told us NAFTA would open up new markets for U.S. goods, stop the flow of immigrants, blah, blah, blah. And that's what I faithfully accepted. But deep down, I knew low-paid Mexican workers had very little disposable income and would not be able to purchase very many American products. I think we all remember President candidate Ross Perot warned us to listen to the giant sucking sound of jobs going to Mexico because of its low wage advantage. Members of Congress knew that as well. If I knew it, they knew it. Plus, they would provide plenty of data from opposition groups about how much harm could come from these so-called free trade agreements without reasonable conditions. But now I thought, surely Congress and the Democratic Clinton administration would not pass something that would harm the middle class in our country, would they? Surely they wouldn't pass something that would throw millions of Americans out of work and harm national security, would they? But they did. As I mentioned before, the Clinton administration also granted China most favored nation status and amended the Glass-Steagall Act, which again legalized the risky activities banks were engaging in prior to the stock market crash in 1929. And they did it because they knew they must win the favor of big campaign contributions to finance their next campaign. For them, it's a matter of survival. And Tom, I hope you decide to run because I want to see if you succumb to this also if you win. I'm just kidding, Tom. Okay. That's why we need campaign reform, finance reform laws. But all this began with corporate America favorable reaction to the Powell memo and their decision to follow its recommendations. Now, years later, they own the major news outlets staffed with journalists who know better than to cross certain boundaries. In the 70s and 80s, foreign trade resulted in the loss of nearly 2 million good-paying union jobs, 200,000 in the steel industry alone. Now, I was unable to find out how many plants were closed in that last part of the 20th century. However, since January 1, according to the AFL-CIO, over 55,000 manufacturing plants have closed down. But a few weeks ago, I saw something on PBS that mentioned 112,000 plants had closed down. So that may be support industries and so on, real small plants. Anyway, it's been a lot. 6 million good paying union jobs were gone, plus another 2 million in support industries. Now, our current foreign trade policies have only enriched special interest groups and impoverished way too many American middle-class families. Not only have millions of good-paying jobs gone overseas to low-paid, desperate foreign workers, according to the U.S. Census Bureau data, since January 1, 2000, the U.S. has been sending over $1.1 billion overseas every minute, every day, 24/7 to cover our foreign trade deficit. That does not include oil imports. Now, I got that. The way I figured $1.1 million was, I took the total trade deficit from January 1, 2000 up through 2012 and divided it by the number of minutes. It came out to over $1.1 million every single minute. Now, folks, think if that wealth had stayed in this country. How can an argument be made for the merits of these free trade agreements, even though our beloved president wants us to get involved in more of them? How can that be good for the middle class in the U.S. economy? And why aren't these things being reported in the news? Because if they were reported regularly, an enraged middle class would pressure Congress to take action, and the corporations who now run the government and own a major stake in the media don't want the public to do that. Why do you think the TP meeting in Addison, Texas received no media coverage or comments? Because it would bring attention to the public details of big business, and many politicians would rather keep suppressed. And since big business owns the media and runs Congress, it's easy to do, and don't think they don't run Congress. Out of sight, out of mind. One Occupy Dallas member who protested the TPP meeting in Addison, Texas, told me his group found out about this meeting on the same news source. They find out about all things of U.S. national importance. Ironically, it's the Middle Eastern Al Jazeera International News Agency. How about that? By the way, that number, that $1.1 billion a minute number I told you about, I got the deficit numbers from the U.S. Census Bureau, and I had some very heated arguments with people in the U.S. Trade Rep's office. None of them knew none of them knew how bad it was, but I told one of them that I got the information from the U.S. Census Bureau office. You will no longer find those documents on their website. I've got them in cyberspace if anybody wants one, though. They're not on their website anymore. They're gone. Weird, isn't it? Okay. Here's another example of lack of coverage. This was taken from a recent advertisement by James T. Borrello and Company. Phased out deductions, it says. High-income earners also have another tax challenge in the form of phased out deductions. Itemized deductions are gradually reduced for high-income earners as their income increases. These include mortgage interest, property tax deductions, and deductions for charitable contributions. The benefit of credits and exemptions is also reduced as income rises. Okay, remember doing the Romney campaign? He proposed lowering the top income tax rate down to 28%, claiming it would be revenue neutral if deductions and exemptions were eliminated on high-income earners. Did you hear anyone challenge him on that issue? Did you hear anyone remind him they already phased out? Not once. Not once. How many times did you hear anybody ask him how it's possible for the golden age of American capitalism to have happened when the top income tax rates were 91% and 70%? Not once. Now let me ask the readers a question, or the audience a question. Do you think the press still has a liberal agenda? Don't you think the reporters already know these things? Could they fear the same things politicians do, losing their jobs? Well, I'll guarantee you they know all about these things, and that's exactly the reason they avoid these controversial questions. Powell indeed endured recognition for coming up with the most brilliant strategy in history, enabling corporate America to turn this nation into what I believe is a fascist state. And we need corporate campaign finance reform to free the politicians from the grip of special interests and antitrust action against 6 international news corporations that tell us what they want us to hear. Now, low-skilled, good-paying manufacturing jobs are not the only ones leaving the U.S. Goldman Sachs estimates 400 to 600,000 high-skilled information and tech jobs have been lost in the past few years. And the pro outsourcing firm Global Insight estimated 104,000 information software designs were outsourced between 2000 and 2003. During those years, North Dallas, Texas suburb Richardson had a section of town nicknamed Telecom Corridor. By 2003, it was full of half-empty buildings. Getting back to the so-called free trade issue, the profits generated by foreign trade are totally dependent on low-cost labor and a lack of regulations for that business model to succeed. If your good-paying job can be done from a desk, your job is at risk, people. I don't care what you're doing. Let's take a little closer look at the World Trade Organization's policy on trade and the environment, which says sustainable development and protection and preservation of the environment are sustainable goals of the WTO. Oh, really? Well, dig a little deeper on their website, and you'll find exceptions like a provision that ensures environmental provisions are not applied arbitrarily and can't be used as disguised protectionism. The WTO has no policy on advancing foreign labor at all. This is a position I saw on their website. The developing countries resist including labor standards because they see it as a guise for protectionism in developed country markets, a smokescreen for undermining the comparative advantage of low-wage developing countries. Now, that makes it a huge unfair disadvantage to the U.S. and its middle-class families. And these middle-class families need to make their congressmen aware that they've had enough of this crap. Here's the WTO's position on child labor. Quote, the WTO has never ruled on child labor because the issue has never come up for a ruling. You go to their website and you will see from various sources, accusations regarding child labor have been listed. So why has it not come up for a ruling? One thing's for sure, a ruling favorable to business who use child labor would pretty well enrage the American public, I believe. That'd be a good reason for big business not to want the issue brought up for ruling, though, wouldn't it? The WTO claimed peace and democracy would be strengthened due to the effects of foreign trade. while bringing up living standards for all. In fact, it was a clever way of taking advantage of millions of desperate people and undermining the U.S. workforce in order to increase profits. Due to a lack of transparency regarding TPP negotiations, many people fear the time-tested method of public debate will not be used in this very important decision that will affect every American, because special interest groups are looking for more sources of cheap labor as labor costs go up in China. Well, this is the official policy I copied from the Office of the U.S. Trade Representative's website. This is the official policy, as is common practice in U.S. free trade negotiations. When TPP negotiations got underway in 2009, 5 years now, the U.S. and its TPP negotiating partners entered into a confidentiality agreement, reflecting the customary understanding between countries engaged in trade negotiations that the negotiations should be carried out in private. The understanding calls for each government to disseminate its negotiating proposals, as well as those from its TPP members, solely to government officials and individuals who are part of the government's trade advisory process. Now, the reason I got into a big hassle with these guys in the Trade Rep's office, I asked them who these guys were. They hung up on me. I believe failure to address the trade issue will be the so-called rope Vladimir Lenin spoke of about when he stated, "We will sell you the rope you will use to hang yourself." If we don't address these trade issues, we will lose our technology gain, and our armed forces will not be able to keep us free. That's why I believe if we haven't already lost that advantage, we will in the next year or so. This country doesn't have, in my opinion, a real good record of using its armed forces here lately, but I'll trust our country before I'll trust somebody else. Here's another thing. What do we do with the assets of other countries when relations go sour? We seize them. Do you think relations will ever go sour with China or somebody else? Might they not be tempted to nationalize ours? Wait and see what happens. Okay, now I said I was going to provide some statistics. And I hope this makes you madder than hell. Just a minute. I'm using scrap wall. Let's see here. Okay. Let's figure out how I'm going to do this. Everybody see this? Moving average.
Let me hold it and you get behind me.
All right, you hold it and I'll get the rest of it.
Oh, you want to get behind me?
Oh, okay. 1945, 1981, average GDP growth, 3.79%. 1981 through 2012, 2.76%. Those trends are long enough, my friends, to tell things aren't going the way they should be going. Okay. Here you go. Moving average unemployment rate. 1945, 1972, 4.4%. 1981, 2012, average unemployment rate 6.06%. Source. Census Bureau figures, by the way. Okay. Here's a chart showing the blue line. Can you see the blue line? Yes. That's the bottom 90%. That's the top 6 to 10%. The green one is the top 2.5%. The top 1% is right here. Now, someone the week before last asked if raising the minimum wage would cause prices to go up. Is that person here? No, it wouldn't, because the money's going right here. The trouble is, you're going to have to get everybody the proper raise. And looking at these lines here, these people here aren't going to be affected much at all. And mainly the top 1%, most of that is in the top 1/10 of 1%, and most of that is in the top 1/100th of 1%. So do we care about the top 1/100th of 1%? Yes. We do? I don't give a damn about them at all. Okay. Let's get to some money here. 1968 median household income. By the way, the minimum wage in 1968 was $1.60. That's equal to $10.72 an hour now today. Now, what's all this crap about $10.10 an hour that you hear every day about going to ruin all these jobs when, damn it, I remember in 1968, the economy was booming. I was making a damn good living. Anyway, if you were to take the wages, and convert it to 2013 dollars as of July 10th last year, 1% of American households earned $66.94 or less. 3.4% earned between $66.94 to $13,381. 5.1% earned between $13,388 to $20,075. 6.1% earned between $20,081 to $26,779. Another 6.1% earned between $26,775 to $33,482. 7.6% earned between $40,163 to $46,850. It gets better. Take that one. 8.2% earned between $46,857 and $53,554. 25% earned the equivalent of $66,938 to $100,400. 12.2% earned between $100,407 to $167,339, and then 2.6% earned over $167,346. Today, the average median household income for the bottom 90% is $31,244. These figures include inflation only. They do not include gains in productivity, which have been those gains have more than doubled worker output. Now, folks, we're getting screwed. And these are the root causes right here. And until they're addressed, we're doomed. Any questions? We can hear them. Tom?
Yeah. I just wonder, what can we do about it? You mentioned,
Get involved. Get involved. Just keep up with current affairs. Get involved. Raise hell. When you hear someone make a comment that you hear,
suggestion,
well, I mean, get it. Find out what's going on. Just a second. And when the topic comes up in your group, tell them what's going on. That's all. I mean, I don't know what else to tell you. Yes, go ahead.
Well, would it be fair to summarize that you feel like the lack of growth of middle-aged people is primarily for two reasons? One is the transference of middle-income jobs to foreigners, and two, the greater reward for people who run businesses.
I think it boils down to killing off the unions because they lobbied for the middle class. And they were successful in keeping wages equal with inflation and productivity gains through up to about 1973.
So I would assume that kind of fits what you said because they lost their ability to do that.
Right.
These other factors.
Right.
So what can we advocate that our leaders do to reverse it?
Stay out of the TPP. Get out of NAFTA. Get out of the WTPO or TPP. Pass the Employee Free Choice Act and demand campaign finance reform.
Say it again.
Stay out of the TPP. Trans-Pacific Partnership. Get out of NAFTA. Get out of the WTO, World Trade Organization. Pass the Employee Free Choice Act, which would negate the effects of Taft-Hartley. Right to work laws. It will give unions power that they lost after Taft-Hartley was passed, which brought about the right to work movement. By the way, wages peaked in 1973. The percentage of income going to the middle class peaked in 1947. That's when the right to work laws were passed. It went from 53% down to about 34% between 47 and 1973.
The right to work laws, the wording is kind of confusing.
The right to it's confusing, all right. The right to work means if you work like for General Motors, like over here in Arlington, they have UAW. But if you don't want to pay dues, you don't have to. If you don't want to be a member of the union, you don't have to. Now, right to work laws, they say they were passed to give the individual freedom of choice whether or not to join a union. Right. But I think if a majority wants a union, then everyone should support it, because they still get the benefits and they still get representation if they don't pay dues. And guess what a lot of people elect not to do? They elect to save $50 a month and not pay the dues. Now,
Right to work laws are state elections. It's not.
Some were
Not elections, but they're voted on by the states. For example, in Texas is a right to work state.
it was voted on by the people.
There's other states that don't have right to work laws.
Right.
So those people who belong to unions will have to pay dues.
Exactly. Whether they want to or not.
What's happened is a lot of
That microphone doesn't have to.
A lot of companies have moved to right to work law, states to work the right laws.
Yeah.
So it would have to be a national. Now I'm thinking that it might be hard to get past the Supreme Court saying that you have to pay dues if you didn't want to belong to a union.
Well, it probably would be in this environment, because we do know that the Supreme Court has shifted to the right, you know.
Well, I guess I don't think that's likely to happen. So what else can we do?
It's not likely to happen unless the public becomes enraged and pissed off and gets involved. Bottom line, folks, public demand or lack of public demand is the deciding factor in how Congress reacts. Yes.
Well, I have a couple of questions. The first of which, what did your wife do when you tore all her wallpaper off?
I haven't faced her rage yet, but if you don't see me around, you'll know what happened.
Well, you're preparing her then to be an activist.
I'll tell you what, I wish I could.
Okay, now,
Because she would definitely get some stuff done, but she's not interested.
you know, not much of this got into our news at all, but it did around the world. Iceland, number one, the people got enraged.
I know.
Took pots,
Right.
They took pans and
Right.
spoons, and thousands of them went to their Congress and ran them out. They held public elections, re-elected a whole new government, and started prosecuting all the bankers criminally. Now, what do you think it will take to get us to follow
Same
suit?
thing.
Okay.
Publics don't have to get involved. Now, you know, and not everybody, I mean, a small percentage is all it takes to, well, for example, civil rights got passed because a very small number of people got involved in the civil rights movement. Right? It wouldn't take a huge amount of people getting involved to bring about the changes that will save this country. The problem is, how do we get the news out in this environment? That's what I'm trying to do tonight. I mean, the things that I brought up here, you never hear discussed on the news. But do you? I mean, you don't hear it on the news.
Well, you hear a lot these days.
Not these numbers.
Maybe not these numbers because most people sleep, but you still hear a lot these days about the middle class.
I know, you know, I gave my first speech 4 years ago. There's very little talk about wealth and income inequality then. That has become a topic lately. But 4 years ago, The hot topics were and are immigration, guns, abortion, the same old stuff.
Well, you don't feel good about the progress you make.
I didn't, well,
We are discussing it these days.
I know, but has a proper diagnosis been made, though? I mean, what's really ailing our economy? Why did it get to this shape? You're still going to hear the same old argument. High taxes and excessive regulations are strangling the growth of the country. Well, I mean, when you go back 30 years and you see the highest growth rates we ever had when taxes were sky high, that disputes that argument all to hell. And then when taxes were lower and things went the other way around, what else do you want? I don't think people have any idea how much influence the business community has over our political process. I don't think they have a clue. I didn't until I became interested in current events. I had no clue. Hell, I voted for Reagan. I voted for George Bush twice. I didn't know better. I'm just dumb. Sorry. But I know better now.
Well, Levy on this voted for Mr. Reagan in 1980, and then the traffic
I know.
tried to strike, and he washed them out of it, put them out of it.
Maybe he should have done a Harry Truman. Draft him in the Army. That's what he did to the railroad engineers and made them go back to work. You know what they ought to do? They ought to draft, Obama should draft Congress and put them on KP until they get this crap straightened out. That's what they ought to do.
Or vice versa.
Well, actually, we ought to throw the whole damn bunch of them out. Because they're all beholden to special interests. I mean, I liked Obama. I mean, I think his affordable health care plan is a good deal. Until someone comes up with a deal that insures everybody, until that happens, the people who are against it can kiss my ass. Okay?
Single payer is just a matter of time. I have a question for you. What meeting was that Ron Kirk was in that was here in Dallas?
Okay, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, that's that trade organization. They were having a meeting here. I mean, representatives from about 20 countries attended the meeting.
This was here recently.
Yeah, last 2012, May of 2012.
Okay, nearly 2 years ago.
But you didn't hear it on the news.
He was the reason I asked. I get a haircut at a certain barber shop over off of MLK. He was there a couple of weeks ago. He had, well, matter of fact, a few days ago he was there. So he's in and out of town here regularly.
Well, he's no longer the trade rep either.
Okay.
But next time you see him, ask him what he thinks about the TPP.
I don't want to be the. I know from personality and temperament. I've heard a lot about it. That wouldn't be in my good. That wouldn't be in my best interest.
Well, you call me and I'll come down and I'll ask him.
In my best interest.
You call me and I'll come down. If I can get there, I'll come down and I'll sure as hell ask him. And when he gives me some bullshit blue sky answer, I'll tell him what the hell's going on. I'll say, how do you justify this crap? Because you go to his website and you look under trade topics, you're gonna walk away with the impression that we are benefiting by foreign trade.
The TPP is not going to pass. There's enough. I think there's about 150 Democrats, congressmen, or no more than that. I forget the number. But last I read, there was nearly 200 of them had written letters.
I know.
Two of them opposed. Is that true?
Well, they're opposing what's called fast-track legislation, which means no filibuster, no changes, vote for it or against it. You can't change anything. And the first fast track legislative act was passed in 1975, right after Powell wrote his memo. I mean, foreign trade, it started out as just a way to bust the unions, and it did. They're threatened now. I mean, the defeat yesterday in Chattanooga, that could be the death. I mean, that could kill them off. It really could. Michigan, Indiana are now right-to-work states. Michigan was their flagship state. They could, I mean, the union movement is threatened. It could very well be gone in the next few years. If it goes, goodbye middle class. Like them or not, they got us the benefits, and they're necessary to keep them. We don't have pensions anymore. You've seen the income figures from 1978. And you know what the people make nowadays. I mean, what more do you want to justify their worth? Anybody else? By the way, time for a commercial. All of this stuff came out of the book I wrote called The Rise and Fall of the Middle Class. If you want a copy, it's $3.95.
Where do you get it?
Online.
What online?
Well, there's no jimdavis11@hotmail.com. You tell me, you email me at that address, and I'll tell you what, you get it through PayPal. Mm-hmm. But if you'll email me at that, you've already got a copy. Albert, you've already got a copy.
I know, but I'm making notes about you.
Okay. Albert's the only one that bought a copy so far. Yes.
How much more do we have to pay to get your autograph?
Just $20. No, I'll do it for nothing. By the way, I'm revising it, and if you want a copy, I'll send you the old copy, and then when the new one's done, I'll send you the new one for free. I mean, this book goes into as many details about how it rose, and there's a lot more stuff about how it fell than what I presented here. And I think the few people that have read it have told me that it's a damn good book, and they learned a lot. So I'm not planning on getting rich off the thing. I mean, if anyone in here can't afford $3.95, I'll give them a copy free. And I'll give anybody else a copy free if they just say I can't afford it. So.
Have you sent Ken Cruz a free copy yet?
No, but I sent John Boehner a copy, along with a letter. See, John Boehner represents my hometown. And in my letter, I said, John, I mean, it was a scathing letter I sent him. I mean, just scathing. I said, P.S., next time you see Adam Christo, please have him call me. He did. Adam Christo called me. He emailed me about 4 or 5 months later. So John Boehner's did tell Adam Christo, Papa, do you know some guy named Jim Davis? And anyway, that's the only way he could have gotten my email address. So say what you want about old John Boy. I think he's a pretty good sport. I'd like to get drunk with him sometime. I think it'd be fun. I'd like to debate him too. I would supply the handkerchiefs. He would need them. I mean, he'd need to wear his boots because they'd be full of tears. Anybody else? Have I done enough damage already?
Well, now it's your turn to talk, so, someone who wants to rebut the speaker, or Anything you want to say? Our speaker gets the last word, but you get to talk now. Les is the first guy that wants to say something. You got 5 minutes, brother.
Well, I certainly enjoyed Jim's presentation. It was insightful. It went into a lot of areas that perhaps we don't normally go into. Unions are necessary. I'm not very supportive of them, but I agree that they are necessary to be there. But then Jim mentioned that we need to understand what the problem is if we're going to come up with a solution. And I would maintain that we have a little bit of misdiagnosis going on here. Just my opinion, we all have them. The Heritage Foundation, interestingly enough, they were the authors of the idea of the free trade zones, the foreign enterprise zones. That's what we were told. However, the actual first paper written and presented on these free trade foreign enterprise zones was presented by Sir Geoffrey Howe of the Fabian Society. In fact, the Heritage Foundation itself has shown itself to be a faithful arm of the Fabian Society. And I don't know who here has even heard of the Fabian Society. Karl Marx gained a lot of press with his planks. One of the planks that always confused me was how, if you're making a government for the people, of the people, why do you need a central bank? Obviously, centralized control was a big factor there. But Marx's ideas really were kind of a violent approach. The Fabian Society's approach is a step-by-step incremental approach, really for many of the same goals. And it's really hard for people who are immersed in this adversarial left versus right, Republican versus Democrat. When you're right in the middle of the propaganda, it's very hard to see outside of the propaganda and realize what the real issue is. In my definition of it, the real issue is statism. Statism is any kind of a tyrannical government versus us. And I really believe in a kind of a populism, not necessarily a socialistic populism, but I'm for the little guy. A lot of politicians say that too, but then they're actually voting differently than they campaign. A famous author had something to say about statism, if I can find it here. Statism, in fact and in principle, is nothing more than gang rule. A dictatorship is a gang devoted to looting the effort of the productive citizens of its own country. When a statist ruler exhausts his own country's economy, he attacks his neighbors. A country that violates the rights of its own citizens will not respect the rights of its neighbors. Those who do not recognize individual rights will not recognize the rights of nations. A nation is only a number of individuals. That was stated by one of the, I'd say, most maligned authors going, Ayn Rand, in her book, Capitalism, the Unknown Ideal. Some people rail against Ayn Rand because they don't understand her. Some folks rail against Ayn Rand because they do understand her. But for whatever reason, she's very unpopular. But what's she really speaking about in all that? I think one of the best presentations I have heard ever given in about an hour and a quarter was given recently by Chris Ann Hall. Chris Ann Hall is a former prosecutor. a disabled military veteran. And I was trying to figure out what to call this talk. It really should have been called The Unknown History Behind the American Constitution, because she shows us how almost everything we know about constitutional America is wrong. We were not involved in an American war for independence. We were involved in a civil war with Great Britain. And it's very interesting when you see it in the perspective of the history of Great Britain and all the different things that came up. You realize Thomas Jefferson didn't write the Declaration of Independence, he plagiarized it. And you start to see how all this fits in history. And as Chris Ann said, people don't change. History repeats itself. We're in the same fight with tyranny now that we were in 200 years and more ago. There's very little difference. Many of the same topics are coming up now. We have a leader now who said, I have a pen. Kings of the past said, I have a pen. I can do whatever I want. I can write whatever law I want. Very interesting. So anyway, I would say we need to properly diagnose the problem. I don't believe it's related. To me, if the power to tax is the power to control. We've lost the reins on taxation. John Kennedy dropped the percentage of tax, the tax rate for the individual, and the tax revenues went up because people were more profitable, they moved more money, they brought in more, they paid more taxes. So I'm in that regard, I disagree with Jim. So you can do your rebuttal later. But just because there are more tax revenues, sometimes a lower tax rate really works to get more revenues. And Jim, thank you for your presentation. You were very, very thought-provoking. Thank you.
Okay, who's next? Come on up here. I forgot your name.
Okay. I too appreciated your presentation. I thought it was great, and I agree with everything really that you said. The only thing is about, I do think that the international trade is something that is here to stay. I think that a lot of it can be improved, it can be more fair, but I don't think we can get rid of it, and I don't even think we would want to. I think it's, you know, just like we had an agrarian society, and then that changed into an industrial society, people had to change with it. And what I think we ought to do now is we should, our people should be better educated so that they can do the things that the modern society requires. For example, a lot of industrial countries have free education for their college students, of able students. When I was young, I could work my way through college, and did. But nowadays it's impossible. The colleges are too expensive. People who are able should have a free college education because it benefits the society.
You're right.
And that's the main thing.
Okay, you're next.
Well, Jim, I thank you too for that presentation. I thought it was very good, and one of the most salient lessons that you taught us is how men can invigorate their wives to become politically active. That was very good. I think in anything, excuse me, if you're going to solve the problem, you need to go to the top of the problem. And I think that history repeats itself because no one has gone to the top of the problem. And the word has been so drilled into human thinking, conspiracy theorists, that you think anybody who thinks that there's a plan behind any of this is a nut. Jim outlined big plans tonight. And starting off with keep it so that the public doesn't know what's going on. Well, you know, 2 or more doing that, that's a conspiracy. These people are so brazen, they care so little about how much money they earn from warfare that cost how many lives and dismembered people and so forth all over the world. We are perpetrating more international crime today than any other nation on earth. And countries that used to be our enemies, I find my thinking more aligned with them. Like right now, I think Putin is a better leader than Obama by about 15 centuries. And it's an incredible thing to see a current president that we have be so brazen about thinking he can give executive orders and bypass Congress. And saying that he's got the right to determine which drone kills which American citizen because he has deemed that they are a traitor or that they are a terrorist or supporting terrorism. To hell with the courts, you know. This is tyranny that we're seeing, and we're so close to it. But it's not just Obama. It's Obama, it's Bush, it's Clinton, it's the other Bush, and it's a bunch of them before. The last patriotic president that I can think of is Kennedy, and look what happened to him. And that was a conspiracy that included all levels of government, even the destruction of evidence in downtown Dallas on the street. The storm sewer where the first shot came from has been removed. In any event, what we need to do is realize also, and there is a lot of material on this, and this sounds really eerie, but these people who run this world, even on the level of political people that we see, are very occult, secretly and fervently. And they follow those practices. They meet out at Bohemian Grove out in California. They meet at Kimball Castle in Colorado. Google these things, find out what's going on. They're wearing their robes. They're having their crazy celebrations and rites and sacrificial rites all over the world. And I think that it is important to realize also that in their ritualistic practices, they have to pre-announce everything that they do. And I was just watching a video the other day. For several years prior to 9/11, in major movies, in TV programs and so forth, you would see the star standing here and a clock up here saying 9/11. Or a guy looks at his wristwatch, it's 9/11, over and over and over and over again, and there are no coincidences. Do not believe in coincidences. There's orchestration of things. Now, with that, in their occult practices, they've pre-announced what they're going to do, so it's legal for them to do it because we haven't objected. The Manchurian Candidate film that came out a long time ago had as stars Janet Leigh and Lawrence Harvey. Lee Harvey. This is not an accident. Not an accident at all. And I think it is very important to look, for instance, at the pyramid on our dollar, that the top part of it is separated from the rest. Why is that? I think there's a very salient reason for that. And do not confine your mind to your belief systems of these things that you know. If you weren't there on the site, you don't know it. You've only read about it or been told about it. And that goes all the way through history. It is very important to dig today and try to learn where is the top controlling factor. It's beyond any political person that we see. It is far beyond anyone we see today or even hear about. And we need to dig into this because we will never solve this belief drummed into us that history repeats itself and that human nature is like this, so we always have these things. As long as we're going to believe all of that, and as long as we're going to believe the BS we're taught so that we're divided into all these segments fighting each other, including left and right and this religion and this language and this nation and that nation, this race and that race, as long as we buy into that garbage and not realize that as the spiritual expression of the Creator we are all one, and make that our living principle, then we will continue to see history repeat itself. And we are on the verge today of going into the worst dark ages in the history of mankind, that at this point, with the technology they have available, it may last, what, forever? 10,000 years, 100,000 years? It just may. Unless we get help from some other people who, even though you don't want to believe it, are there and have been giving us some help, though they have rules of non-interference as well. But there is a lot of information out there, and again, I'm going to say this, I've said it 100 times. Every government agency lies, but NASA tells the biggest and the most lies because they have the most to cover up. They know a lot more about what's going on in this solar system, in this galaxy, in this universe than they will ever let us know. Because if we knew that there were fine people out there with far better ways of living and loving each other, we'd look at our governments and say, hey, we don't need you. Get the hell out of here. We need to pick up our pots and pans and go to Washington by the tens of thousands and drive them out like the Icelanders did. 4 countries now, Iceland, Hungary, Russia, have thrown out the Rothschild banking system, and hopefully Ireland is next, and it needs to be a trend that happens all over the world. It is the banking system that destroyed Libya. Everything we've been told, as you learned from the Moriartys when they were here, about Libya in our news media is 180 degrees the opposite of the truth. And it was all over a gold-backed currency that would eliminate the fiat money that they can print up and even just enter on a computer and support any evil interest in the world to any degree they want. That's fascism, and they control it. Start with the banking system.
Okay, who's next? There has to be a next. Oh, come on up here.
Great summation.
You got 5 minutes.
I don't need 5 minutes. Well, I think you made a report earlier about unions, and I share your belief. I think unions did a great service to the nation. If it hadn't been for unions, we wouldn't have made very much money. Unions were kind of on the forefront for equal rights. In 1964, when the Civil Rights Act was being debated, we had 3 congresspersons from Texas to vote for it. Ralph Yarber, Senator, Gonzalez out of San Antonio, and Brooks out of all places, Beaumont, Texas. They voted for it, and that's probably the reason. Probably Ralph Yarber was not reelected. But I can't disagree with anything you've said. I know I used to be a kind of a disciple of Paul Rucker. He did a lot of consulting work in business, and he used to write, I thought, real thoughtful consultation and forums that he put on. But one of the last books that I read, he was telling the corporations to get involved. And this was about the time frame you're talking about when they really got involved. But a lot of things that are happening today is not new. I wasn't there when the founding fathers drew up the Constitution when we was under the Articles of Confederation. But one of the things that they wanted order their way, and they came up with a Constitution that provided a degree of stability, and most people can't argue a great deal with stability. The Shea rebellions were having problems with banks too. They had fought in the American Revolutionary War, and the banks foreclosed on them. So they didn't have nothing to go back to. So, and after the war was over, they kind of demobilized because they didn't have any money. And then the Shea rebellions, and the wealthy people had to hire an army to depress that. And so that's kind of when it got started, but it got started before that. Rucker he wrote, and he was big-time consulting of all the major corporations during that time. And he wrote a book telling them to get involved, and Powell was one of them too. There are a large number of people that...
He probably did that after the Powell came out.
It was in the 70s. I think we must move away from peripheral issues. That's all we hear. You look at politics going there and talking about peripheral issues. They aren't talking about solving the problem. They're talking about peripheral issues. And most people hang their hats on that, one way or the other. A large number of people do. And we've got to have some kind of way to get people to recognize the dilemma we're facing and how it's going to affect them. But we have a mentality among a group of people in America, they're willing to stay poor as long as they keep people they dislike poor. And that's a hard thing to deal with. And so those are some of the things we got to do. Our education system don't teach people to think. We don't teach people to think. We teach them to do, but not think. But the world that we live in, you got to think. And in the multinational corporations, the people they're going to hire are the people who can think. They got to compete with other companies in other nations. And so that's why everybody's saying technology and stuff like this, the type of training. But historically, people who were taught as engineers they were great engineers, accountants, great accountants. They think very in depth in their subject area, but when it gets to the broader thing, they're not trained. And when I was in college, there was some research pointing out a number of people, very good physicians and all the major professions, but they were taught in that narrow area. They wasn't taught to think out of the box. And that's what's hurting us. And 2 million of us are lazy. We don't want to study. We don't want to think. We just want to do what we're doing, and almost everything we've been doing now has been upset. The middle class is being destroyed. The poor is being trumped on, and a great deal of insecurity among most of us, to 90%. I thought the Occupy Wall Street was awakening, and I think it had some impact on a large number of people to think, because they began to look, so this is me. Well, this is what's happened to me. And my concern is not so much about me, but for young people that are coming after me and what they're going to find and the difficulties. And I didn't train my students, my children, to deal with that, because they didn't have to worry about a lot of things. They didn't have to worry about going to college. I was able to send them to college. And so they still don't understand a lot of things. So we need to find some way to educate people so they will analyze and think about things before they act. And if they do that, I think we will find we all have a common interest, and we better pursue that common interest that's good for all of us and not just good for the few. Thank you.
Okay, we're getting close on time. Anyone next? Anyone we missed? Oh, come on up here. You want to?
All right, folks, wake up. That's the first thing you need to do. This fellow gave us accurate information on exactly what our problems is. He didn't give us the information on how to fix it. How to fix it? Someone of this older generation here has a shopsmith someplace. Dust it off. A shopsmith. A lathe. A lathe. A shopsmith, he can sell like 11 different tools in one. The sanders, the drill press, no matter how you configure it. It's what's commonly called a shopsmith. Drag it out. When that grandson comes over, make sure he knows how to make a table leg. Make him work. He wants to go to McDonald's. Fine. There's the lawn. Here's the lawnmower. Get the job done. We'll go to Burger King later. If we want to export things, let's export McDonald's. That's all that fattening stuff. We are already, the disease that's got us has already got the youth of China and Japan. I saw a video on it. They have internet sickness. They wear diapers to these arcades so they don't have to go to the bathrooms because they're afraid it will hurt their performance. They are going down. What we got to do is we have to go up. We have to pass on our traditions. We have to get these kids to do these things. I've gone through 2, call them employees. They want to pick and choose what they want to do. I put a rant out there on Facebook. I do not believe in unemployment, especially with this younger generation. They don't want to work. I don't want to show up today. That's fine. Oh, I don't want to do this. That's fine. I don't want to be up here holding a camera here or carrying your bag around. That's fine. Go starve. I'm not saying you have to work to eat, but I'm saying you have to eat to learn. You have to get these moving. The 99%, we are bigger and stronger than that 1%. We have a very good little target there. Let's go get them.
Anybody else? We're running out of time, just so you know. Make it quick. He's got to have time to rebut. I haven't even said anything. So.
Well, one thing we seem to agree on, and I think it is a truism, it's a very small 1%. It's actually the actual people controlling things are a minuscule percentage. How do they keep all of us supporting them? It's mind control, folks. It's truly profound programming.
So I get to talk too, don't I? I'm the last one standing. I just want to point out that, anyway, it's been brought up here that mind control, different things, but truly we have the best Congress. I've said this before. We got the best Congress money can buy. They're controlled by money. And if you look at the definition of fascism, it's corporations controlling government. That's what we have. We have corporations controlling our government. And this is not a good thing. That's why both parties have their people there that vote the way the money tells them to vote. So we have to change that. One way to change that is get Congress to act, I've said this before, in its own self-interest to instruct the Federal Communications Commission to require the media to provide sufficient free airtime, the airways are free, for federal candidates in general elections to air their views. That would change everything. That would make the congressman represent the district instead of representing the people buying his vote in Washington. Then you might get some other laws passed, such as putting tariffs on corporations and sending jobs overseas. Keep the jobs here, don't send them overseas. Put the difference in labor costs in, as far as tariffs are concerned, the difference in labor costs. Apple produces everything in China and sells it here. They don't have any jobs here. So why don't they produce things here? Because it's cheaper to get cheap labor somewhere else. So make them pay the difference in labor costs. They'll end up producing things here. That's number one. Number two, then we need to, on top of the fair trade agreement, this is you brought this up, TPP and these different things. Labor is not involved in that. The corporations get what they want, but we have to change this. But we can only do that if we get Congress to do it. We can only get Congress to do it if we get the money out of the election. So I'm going to shut up right there. That's about it. And Jim gets the final word.
Okay. Okay, the first man said he wasn't in favor of unions, but agreed we need to have them. I'll elaborate. I don't think they've done a very good job of informing their value. Since I've been an activist 5 years, I've seen, I don't even know the AFL-CIO's name, the president's name. I can't even think of it. That's how often I see him. What's his name, Tom? The president of the AFL-CIO. You don't know either. But by God, you sure as hell saw Walter Reuther on the weekend news about every month or so back in the 60s and 70s, didn't you? When's the last time I've seen, what's his name, once on PBS. One time in the last 5 years. I mean, they're not making their case, and they've got a case they can make. I just made it for them. Now, Kennedy taxes. He lowered the top rate from 91% to 70%. I don't know whether revenue increased or not. I'm going to challenge you on that one. Bring information with you next week to show us. Show me. Globalization. here to stay. Why? In its present form? Here's what I would do. If I was king for a day, this would be my foreign trade policy. You want access over here? Then you must obey EPA laws that have been set by an international committee that will protect the environment. You must allow unions, you must allow collective bargaining and the right to strike, and you must not restrict our markets to any of our goods. You do that, that would improve mankind around the world, and we could compete in that kind of an environment. If they had to obey the same rules that we did, we would prevail. And it would go a long way to enhancing mankind around the world, which would bring about a more peaceful world. What do you think would have happened if we had given, say, Iraq or Afghanistan, granted them most favored nation status for trade purposes? I think terrorism would I think prosperity would go a long way in stamping out terrorism, is what I think. I know prosperity breeds contentment. I know that. Okay. Pal Memo conspiracy. No, I don't think so. Too many people from different parts of the country got involved in implementing his ideas. A lot of them didn't know each other, but they had common goals. And I think oftentimes my good friend Al confuses conspiracy with strategy. That's what I think. Executive orders. Well, when you have a Congress that won't pass anything, and they haven't, why not use what power you can to try to do the things that you think need to be done? One thing I didn't mention, if you took the total net worth in this country and divided it by 316 million people, each person would have $245,000. If you took the total income last year and divided by 316 million people, each person would have over $45,000. So don't even try and tell me we can't afford to keep Social Security and Medicare and fund the government. And don't even try and tell me we can't afford to pay someone $10.10 an hour based on all that income that. And I'm not saying it should be divided up even, but I think the little guy needs a better chance to get his share of it. And he's not getting his share of it. He's being robbed of his labor. Constitution. Someone mentioned the Constitution. Preamble of the Constitution says, in order to form a more perfect union, it mentions providing for the common defense. We've done a damn good job of doing that. Ensuring domestic tranquility, provide for the common welfare. We haven't done a good job of doing that. We do those other two things as well as we provide for the common defense. Problem solved. Gentlemen, I believe you're the man that picks the films, right? You said I didn't mention how to fix it. I did. Stay out of the TPP, get out of NAFTA, get out of the WTO, pass the Employee Free Choice Act, amend campaign financing reform. Remember? That'll fix it. I'm convinced that'll fix it. Well, right. Tom, I'll tell you what, next time you have an open meeting, I'd like to be the speaker, and my topic will be life in the early 20th century. I think not many people know what it's really like. I think it'd be a real interesting topic. Talk about poorhouses, stuff like that. That's it.
They want us out of here by 9 o'clock, so we're going to retire down to Starbucks at the corner for those of you who wish, and our speaker is more than welcome, so we'll be down there. And
Tell about the next week's meeting.
yeah, I was mentioning next week's meeting is police brutality in Dallas, politics and culture and the DAs in the Dallas Police Department that breeds oppression. That's going to be next week's meeting. I forgot to mention that before. Carol Flanagan, she's the founder of Mothers Against Police Brutality. She'll be our speaker next week, and I gave this handouts. You all have them. I handed this all out to everybody, so you have it there. Just don't forget about it. It'll be a good one next week.
Anybody want to buy some wallpaper? I've got 200 rolls.
This is William, your videographer from Two Hats Publishing. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you like it, please leave comments below, or like us, or follow us, and get notices of all our videos. We love it, even when you call. So when visiting the Bar Beck's restaurant, tell them you want your reservation to the next College of Complex class.